It started on a Tuesday. Not a particularly special Tuesday, no birthdays, no anniversaries, not even a dinner reservation. Just one of those still spring days in early May when everything feels suspended in the soft bloom of things yet to come. I'd been folding laundry in the upstairs guest room, the one we always said we'd turn into an office, but never did. There was a quiet in the house that used to feel comforting. Now, after almost 30 years of marriage, it just felt heavy, like the silence knew too much. And then the phone rang. It was my husband, Michael, calling from the airport, telling me that his brother Raymond, well, technically his stepbrother, would be stopping by. His flight had been delayed on his way back to Chicago from Phoenix, and he had a 6-hour layover. "He'll take an Uber," Michael said. "Just offer him a beer or something, would you?" I hadn't seen Raymond in almost 12 years. We never really spent much time with him. He'd always felt more like a satellite than family, orbiting the edges of reunions and holidays, polite but distant. I remembered him being charming in a restless sort of way, quieter than Michael, but with this odd, self-contained warmth that made you wonder what he was thinking. And I remembered, maybe a little too vividly, the way he looked when we were younger, tall, tanned from wherever he'd been living at the time, always with a camera slung over his shoulder and a story just vague enough to make you want to lean in. By the time he rang the bell, I'd already changed out of my yoga pants and into something with sleeves. Not because I wanted to impress him, I told myself. It just didn't feel right answering the door in sweats. He was older, obviously. We all were. His hair was streaked with silver now, not the sun-drenched blonde I remembered, and there were lines at the corners of his eyes that hadn't been there before. But God, they suited him. If anything, age had sculpted him into something more interesting, more magnetic. He smelled faintly of cedarwood and jet fuel, and when he hugged me hello, it felt less like family and more like memory. "Wow," he said, stepping inside, his eyes scanning the foyer. "You haven't changed a bit." It was the kind of thing people say, without thinking. But he didn't say it like that. We sat in the kitchen, catching up over beers, the easy conversation slipping into more personal currents than I'd expected. He asked about my work, I'd stopped teaching last year, and how I was adjusting to early retirement. He asked about the kids, about the neighborhood, about Michael's golf obsession, which had become so consuming he now spent every weekend on the course, even when it rained. "I don't get it," I admitted, swirling the foam in my glass. "It's like he retired from me." Raymond's eyes met mine. They were still that pale gray blue, like morning fog. "Do you miss him?" he asked softly. The question caught me off guard. I laughed, trying to make it sound light. "Miss him? He's still here. Just elsewhere." He nodded like he understood too well. Then silence again. Not awkward, but charged in a way I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just that I'd been lonely. It was that I'd forgotten I could still be noticed. That someone might look at me like I was still a woman. A few hours later, after another drink and some cold leftovers I'd pulled from the fridge, he stood up to leave. I walked him to the door. He didn't hug me this time. He just lingered a moment, then said, "You always made this place feel like a home. You know that?" Something in his voice made my throat catch. And then he was gone. I didn't sleep well that night. Not because I'd done anything wrong, but because something had shifted. The way you shift your weight when you've stood too long in one place, realizing how numb you've gone. It wasn't long before we started texting. At first, it was innocent. Thank yous and follow-ups and updates on flights and photos of a meal he said reminded him of something I used to make. Then it grew. "Do you ever miss the chaos?" he texted one afternoon. The unexpected? He meant travel, of course. Raymond had spent most of his adult life flitting between continents, shooting documentaries, living out of backpacks and camera bags. But something about the phrasing struck me as personal. "I think I miss feeling interesting," I replied, before I could stop myself. There was a pause. Then, "You are. You always were." That was the first time I felt it, the pull. It wasn't dramatic. It was gentle, like a tide changing direction. And yet, somehow, I knew everything would be different now. Raymond came back through town 2 weeks later. This time, he stayed overnight. Michael was out of town for a golf retreat in Palm Springs. I told myself it was just one night and that I was doing Raymond a favor. He'd been working a job nearby and needed a place to crash. That's all. We had dinner.
He brought wine.
We sat out on the patio. The air was cool and smelled faintly of cut grass and early summer. I wore a cotton dress I hadn't put on in years. It felt too young for me now, but when I passed by the hallway mirror, I didn't hate the way it looked. "I always thought you were beautiful," he said quietly, without turning his head. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Later, when the night had stretched and softened into something slow and humming, he touched my wrist.
Lightly.
As though he was asking permission.
"Tell me to stop," he said.
But I didn't. We moved carefully at first, as though the years between us made us both a little hesitant. But then something broke open in me, something I didn't know was still there. It wasn't just the heat of it, the slow slide of his hands, the way he murmured my name like it belonged to him. It was the recognition that someone could still look at me and want not the memory of what I was, but the reality of what I am. His mouth found the inside of my thigh, and I heard myself gasp in a way that didn't sound like me. And when he finally moved above me, pressing in, I arched to meet him like we were made to fit that way. There was no awkwardness, no doubt. Just skin and breath and the deep, aching need to feel alive again. Afterward, we lay tangled in the sheets, his hand tracing lazy circles on my hip. "This shouldn't have happened," I whispered. "But it did," he murmured, pulling me closer. "And it doesn't feel wrong." I didn't argue. When Michael returned, things resumed. At least on the surface. But nothing felt the same. I found myself checking my phone more often, craving the little messages that came at strange hours, photos of wherever Raymond had landed next, jokes about things we'd shared, memories I didn't realize we both held. It wasn't just sex. It was attention. A kind of intimacy I hadn't felt in years. Was it love? Not quite. But it was something dangerously close. And whatever it was enough to make me risk everything I thought I knew. And I wasn't ready to stop. The mornings after were always the hardest. Not because of guilt, at least not in the way people expect. It wasn't some melodramatic weight pressing down on my chest or an urge to confess in tears.
It was subtler than that.
A kind of hollow echo, like laughter in an empty room. I would wake up beside Michael, his back turned to me as always, and stare at the ceiling, my body still humming with memory. Raymond had a way of lingering without being present. A touch remembered on the small of my back. The scent of his cologne. Something woodsy, masculine, faintly foreign, still clinging to the sheets he'd slept in 2 nights before. Even the silence in the house seemed to shift when he left, like the walls were holding their breath. He messaged me the next afternoon. Just 3 words. "Still thinking about you." It was simple, direct.
No emojis. No paleris.
I stared at the screen longer than I should have before replying. "You shouldn't be." He didn't answer right away. And when he finally did, it was just, "I am, anyway." The thing about being married for almost 30 years is that everyone assumes you're past the point of temptation. They think passion belongs to the young, or, at the very least, the newly matched. No one talks about what it feels like when you're 56, your kids are grown and gone, and the man you once stayed up all night for now falls asleep with the remote still in his hand. Michael hadn't touched me, not really touched me, in over 9 months. We kissed out of habit, hugged like coworkers, slept like strangers. And I had made my peace with that, or thought I had, until Raymond reminded me I had a body worth reaching for. We saw each other again 2 weeks later. He was passing through on his way to a photography conference in Seattle and asked if we could meet, just for lunch, just to talk. I said yes before I'd even finished reading the message. We met at a small bistro 2 towns over. I wore a blouse that dipped just low enough at the neckline to hint, but not shout. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table, sunglasses perched on his head, nursing an espresso. His face lit up when he saw me. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said, standing to greet me. He didn't kiss my cheek, but I felt the nearness of his breath when he leaned in. Neither was I admitted. We ordered light, salads and wine, though it was barely past noon, and talked like old friends, like co-conspirators. We laughed more than we should have. When he reached across the table and brushed a crumb from the corner of my mouth with his thumb, I felt it in places that had been asleep for years. "Come with me," he said softly, as we stood by the car afterward. "Just for a drive." I hesitated, looked at my watch, my phone, my wedding ring. "I have errands," I murmured. He leaned closer. "Run them later." I went. We drove along the back roads, the windows down, the air thick with honeysuckle and something like nostalgia. He told me stories about Patagonia, about a woman he'd loved once in Amsterdam, about the way the sky changed colors in Morocco at dusk. At one point, he pulled the car over by an old vineyard that had gone fallow, the rows of twisted vines like ghostly fingers clawing at the sky. There was no one around, just the two of us and the long, aching quiet. He turned toward me. "Why did you come?" I didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Because you make me feel like I exist." His hand found mine, fingers sliding between mine like they belonged there. "Come to the hotel," he whispered. I didn't answer. But I didn't stop him when he started driving again, either. The hotel was nothing fancy. A business suite near the airport.
Clean. Safe.
But inside, everything felt electric. We didn't speak much. He pressed me against the door as it clicked shut behind us, his mouth finding mine with an urgency that stripped away the rest of the world. Clothes became obstacles. Buttons fumbled, zippers hissed. When he pulled my blouse over my head, he paused just long enough to look. Really look. "You're more beautiful now than you've ever been," he said. I wanted to deflect, to make a joke. But the way he said it, slow, reverent, it landed somewhere I hadn't let anyone touch in years. He kissed my collarbone, my shoulder, the inside of my wrist. Every gesture deliberate, worshipful. When he knelt in front of me and pressed his mouth between my thighs, I had to grip the wall to stay upright. And when he lifted me to the bed, slow and sure, moving inside me with a rhythm that was both gentle and commanding, I let go in a way I didn't know I still could. My whole body opened, sobbing with pleasure I'd forgotten was mine to feel. Afterward, we lay there, breathless and damp, the room dimming around us. "I don't want to be the reason you break," he murmured against my shoulder. "You're not," I said. "You're the reason I woke up. Back home." The world kept spinning. Michael was polite, predictable. He didn't notice that I hummed under my breath while loading the dishwasher. Didn't ask why I smiled at nothing in the garden. If he suspected, he never said a word. But something in me had changed. I started wearing lipstick again. Bought new lingerie. Not for Raymond, but for me. I went back to yoga. Took long walks by myself. Earbuds in. Miles Davis in my ears. The wind in my hair. I felt untethered. And freer than I had in decades. Raymond and I didn't see each other every week. Sometimes there were gaps, 5, 10, even 15 days without a touch. But the messages never stopped. Sometimes sexy, sometimes sweet, sometimes just a photo of a place that made him think of me. And always, when we met again, it was like the first time, eager, familiar, desperate. One night, after a slow, candlelit dinner in my kitchen while Michael was away at a conference, Raymond pulled me into my own bedroom. The same bed I'd shared with my husband for over half my life. And somehow that made it more intimate, not less. "I want to know all of you," he said that night, his voice low as he moved inside me. "Not just the parts that ache." I cried afterward, not from guilt, but from the sheer overwhelming grief of having lived so long feeling invisible. I don't know when it stopped being an affair and started being something else. Something deeper, more dangerous. He started to say things that scared me. Things like, "I wish we'd met when we were younger." And, "Do you think you'd ever leave him?" I didn't answer.
Couldn't.
Because I didn't know. But I started asking myself questions I hadn't let surface in years. Not just, am I happy? But, am I still the kind of woman who could start over? It was late August when everything began to tilt. The kind of heat that clings to your skin even in the shade, thick and airless. Michael had been gone for almost a week. Golf again, of course. This time in Scottsdale. Some charity tournament that somehow also required expensive dinners and cigars. I didn't ask questions anymore. I didn't even pretend to be interested. Raymond was in town again. Officially, he said it was for a potential film pitch with some studio people, but we both knew better. He stayed with me for 3 nights. Not in secret, not exactly. I told the neighbors he was my husband's stepbrother, which was true. I said he needed a place to crash. Also true. What I didn't tell them was that the man upstairs in my bed had memorized every inch of my body and touched it like he was trying to bring me back to life. Those nights were different from the others.
Softer.
Slower. We cooked together. He played old jazz records on Michael's forgotten turntable in the den, and we danced barefoot in the kitchen, laughing over burnt risotto and wine-stained counters. "You laugh more when you're with me," he said once, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "I don't remember when I stopped," I answered. And it was the truth. That Friday, we went for a walk just before sunset, down the path behind the house that led to the edge of the woods. It had been years since I'd bothered to walk that trail. Too many mosquitoes. Too many memories. But with Raymond, I felt bolder. Younger almost. We stopped at a clearing where the trees opened wide to a sky so pink it looked painted. He turned to me, took both of my hands in his. "I need to ask you something," he said. His voice was calm, but something in his eyes made my stomach tighten. "What is it? Is this real for you?" he asked. "What we're doing? What we have? Or is this just something you need right now to feel alive?" I didn't answer right away. The truth felt like a delicate thread stretched too tight. One wrong pull, and everything might unravel. "I don't know," I whispered. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't plan to feel anything." "But you do," he said, stepping closer. "Feel something." "Yes. And you know I'm in love with you." I closed my eyes. Because I did know. He'd never said the words before. Not directly. But I'd seen it. In the way he watched me when I wasn't speaking. In the way he kissed my palm when we parted. In the way his body curled protectively around mine in sleep, like I was something to be guarded. When I opened my eyes, I saw it written all over his face. Unapologetic. Steady. "Ray," I said softly, using the name only a few had ever called him. "I love being with you. But I don't know how to be with you. Not in this life. Not yet." He nodded, jaw tightening. But he didn't walk away. Instead, he whispered, "Then tell me what you need. Tell me how long you want me to stay." And I broke. Right there in the clearing, with cicadas singing and the last of the sun warming my back, I reached for him like I'd fall apart if I didn't. We sank down onto the earth, tangled in roots and leaves and stolen breath. He lifted my skirt, and I wrapped my legs around him, no words between us, only movement, slow, desperate, reverent. There was something raw in the way he held me, something close to grief. And I felt it too, that trembling, terrifying knowledge that what we had could not live in the light forever. But I didn't stop him. I didn't stop myself. We made love every night that weekend. In the guest room, on the stairs, in the shower with the water pounding down and my hands braced against the tile, his voice in my ear telling me I was beautiful, that I was his, that he didn't care where we were, as long as I was there. Each time felt urgent. A kind of slow-burning panic beneath the pleasure, like we were devouring something we couldn't keep. On the final night, he stayed up late, sitting in the kitchen with a whiskey while I lay upstairs pretending to sleep. I watched him from the top of the stairs. The way he sat barefoot at my kitchen table, eyes distant, lips parted like he was whispering to someone who wasn't there. He looked older somehow. Not tired, but waiting. And that terrified me, because I didn't know what I was ready to give. After he left the next morning, everything became too quiet. Michael came home that evening, tan and chatty, and full of nothing. He kissed me on the cheek, asked if the sprinklers had gone off while he was away, then spent the next hour talking about a new driver he wanted to buy. I sat across from him, nodding, sipping wine, feeling my insides float somewhere just out of reach. It was surreal, like I'd stepped into someone else's life. A life I'd once known. A version of me I no longer believed in. That night, Michael reached for me in bed. It was rare.
Clumsy.
Not aggressive, but habitual. I froze. His hands on my body felt foreign, like a borrowed gesture. I let him touch me, let him press against me, go through the motions. I even faked it. And afterward, as he rolled away, satisfied and oblivious, I stared into the dark, shame and sadness swirling in me like smoke. Not because I'd betrayed him, but because I had never felt more alone. I didn't see Raymond for a month. He texted, called once or twice, sent a postcard from Madrid with no return address, just one sentence on the back. The light here would look beautiful on your skin. I didn't answer, because I didn't know what to say, because I missed him so badly it hurt to breathe. Then, one afternoon in late September, Michael's mother called. She wanted us all to come down for Thanksgiving. The whole family.
Apropé reunión.
And Raymond would be there. Michael mentioned it over dinner, between bites of baked chicken and steamed carrots. Ray's coming, he said. He's finally taking a break from all that globe-trotting nonsense. I must have gone pale, because he looked up. Are you okay? Fine, I said quickly, forcing a smile. Just tired. But my heart was pounding, because I didn't know what would happen when I saw him again. Because I didn't know what I wanted to happen. Because the version of myself I'd become in secret was starting to feel more real than the one I lived with every day. Thanksgiving crept up like a wave I didn't know how to brace against. The trip down to Michael's mother's house was uneventful on the surface. 5 hours in the car, Michael narrating local radio reports and football stats while I stared out the window, watching golden fields and brittle trees blur into memory. I felt both nowhere and everywhere at once, as if I'd left something vital behind, but didn't know where. We arrived just before sunset. The driveway was full of cars, cousins, siblings, their grown children. Laughter spilled out from the porch. Someone was playing piano inside, badly, but enthusiastically. And then, just as I stepped out of the car, I saw him. He was leaning against the side of the garage, a bottle of beer in one hand, his shirt sleeves rolled halfway up his forearms. Casual, effortless. But when his eyes met mine, everything else blurred. It was like the first time again. That impossible instant when a whole life tips towards something new. He didn't smile, didn't wave, just watched. And I felt it all over again. That impossible tug in my belly, that ache between my thighs, that terrifying flutter behind my ribs. I forced myself to look away. The first hours were a blur. Hugs and polite chatter. Everyone asking how the kids were doing, what Michael was planning for retirement when we'd take that trip to Europe we always talked about. I played the role I'd perfected over decades. The warm, dependable wife. The woman who made polite toasts, asked about gluten allergies, folded napkins in the shape of swans. But my skin buzzed with every movement behind me. Every time I felt his presence in the room. Raymond and I barely spoke. A glance here. A brush of his hand near mine when we passed the breadbasket. A murmured, "Excuse me," when we both reached for the same serving spoon, and our fingers grazed. It was agony. And ecstasy. That night, after the dishes were done and the guests had scattered to their respective bedrooms and couches, I stepped outside for air. The garden behind the house was quiet. Just the low hum of a wind chime, the scent of rosemary and pine, the crunch of gravel beneath my slippers. And then his voice. "You always disappear when the party ends." I didn't turn around. Just closed my eyes. Some of us only feel real in the quiet. He stepped closer. I could feel the heat of him behind me. "I've missed you." "You shouldn't say that."
Why?
"Because your husband's upstairs and you're afraid he might remember you exist?" I turned then. Slowly. And there he was. Standing inches away, looking at me like I was the last thing left in a world that made sense. "You have no idea what this has done to me," I whispered. "What you have done to me." He reached out, touched my cheek. "I know exactly what I've done. I woke you up." I didn't speak. I didn't move. Because I wanted him to kiss me so badly it hurt. But he didn't. Instead, he stepped back. "Come to me tomorrow. Before dinner. The old shed." You know the one. And then he turned and disappeared into the shadows. I didn't sleep that night. Michael snored beside me, oblivious. The house groaned with the weight of generations and secrets. I lay still, staring at the ceiling, feeling the tide of choice rise in my chest. What was I doing? What was I becoming? And did I care anymore? I found the shed the next afternoon. It hadn't changed in 30 years. Rusted tools, dusty shelves, a broken rake. But the second I stepped inside, I felt him. He pulled me into his arms, kissed me like he hadn't eaten in weeks. Like I was water in a desert.
There was no slow build this time.
He lifted me onto the workbench, shoved my skirt up around my hips. No time for undressing. Just heat and hunger and desperation. He was inside me in seconds, our mouths pressed to each other's to stifle the gasps. The tools clanged faintly behind us, the air thick with sweat and longing and 20 years of what-ifs. We moved together like animals, like poetry, like punishment. And when it was over, he buried his face in my neck, breathing hard. I don't want to be a secret anymore, he whispered. My throat tightened. I don't know how to undo this life. You don't have to undo it, he said. You just have to leave it. I stared at the cracked window above his shoulder, at the light filtering through dust and cobwebs. I don't know who I am without it. Yes, you do, he said. You're just scared to admit it. We parted that evening like strangers. The rest of the weekend passed in a haze. I cooked. I smiled. I sat beside Michael at dinner and passed him the gravy while pretending I wasn't dying inside. When we got home, the silence in our house was louder than ever. I kept expecting it to feel like a return, like I'd cross the river and come back safely. But it didn't feel like safety. It felt like a cage. And I was no longer someone willing to live quietly inside it. 2 weeks later, I told Michael. Not about Raymond, not in detail. I didn't speak his name. But I told him I had changed. That I couldn't keep pretending we were okay. That I wasn't angry, just empty. And that I needed to leave. He didn't shout. Didn't cry. He just stared at me, stunned. I thought we were fine, he said quietly. I know you did, I answered. And that was the saddest part of all. I didn't move in with Raymond. I didn't fly off to Spain or start over in a loft in the city. I rented a small cottage outside town. Just me, my books, and a kitchen with good light. I started writing again, just journals, short pieces, nothing serious. And I took long walks. Every morning. Every evening. And sometimes, when I rounded a corner and the sky opened wide, I would feel it. That flicker of joy, of grief, of being awake. Raymond still wrote. Sometimes a message. Sometimes a photo. Sometimes a single sentence that landed like thunder. The wind sounds like you. The moon looked lonely without you tonight. Still thinking about you. And sometimes I answered. Sometimes I didn't. But I never blocked his number. Because some doors don't need to close. Some just need to stay ajar, whispering possibility on the other side. It started with a wedding. Not mine, of course. That was nearly 30 years ago. No, this was my daughter's wedding, Elena, my youngest. She looked luminous that day, floating down the garden aisle in her mother-of-pearl gown, her cheeks flushed with a joy I vaguely remembered. The music, the lavender-scented air, the way her eyes locked with her fiancé's, it was all perfect. Too perfect, maybe. I sat beside my husband, Alan, who was dabbing his eyes with a napkin more out of obligation than emotion. We've been married since 1994. He still calls me Han, still mows the lawn every Saturday morning, and still forgets my birthday once every 3 years. We're not unhappy, but we're not much of anything anymore. A rhythm, a habit, a well-worn pair of shoes that no longer fit quite right, but you can't bear to throw out. Across the aisle, in the sun-drenched rows of chairs, I spotted someone I hadn't seen in over 2 decades. I blinked to make sure it was really him, Daniel, my stepbrother. Well, technically, ex-stepbrother. My mother married his father for a brief, chaotic stretch when we were both in our 20s. They divorced just as quickly, but for that strange year and a half, we shared a house and a mailbox, and a few quiet looks neither of us ever acknowledged. Daniel and I had always had a certain tension. Nothing improper, just something unspoken. Something we both pretended didn't exist, like the occasional creak of the house settling at night that you tell yourself is just the wind. He was 6 years older than me, with dark eyes that missed nothing and a slow, easy confidence that drove my college friends mad. I remembered him in a towel once, passing from the bathroom to his room, water sliding down his chest, his mouth curved into a smirk when he caught me looking. And now, 25 years later, he was sitting alone, tan and lean, silver at his temples, in a tailored navy suit that hugged his broad shoulders like a second skin. When he turned his head and met my eyes, the breath left my body like someone had pressed a thumb to my diaphragm. After the ceremony, I found myself walking toward him without deciding to. Our hug was tentative at first, then warmer than it should have been. "You haven't changed a bit," he said into my ear. "You're a terrible liar," I laughed, stepping back to study him. "You looked expensive. And you look like trouble," he said. I rolled my eyes, but I felt it. That flicker. That old heat. We sat at the same table during the reception, our chairs angled just slightly inward, as though the room narrowed around us. We spoke in that shorthand you only share with someone who's known you in another life. The way we referred to my mother's old dog, or how he teased me for burning toast every morning back then. Alan was seated 3 chairs down, engrossed in a conversation with our son-in-law's uncle about electric cars. He didn't glance my way once. At one point, Daniel leaned in and brushed something off my collarbone, a petal, maybe, or an invisible excuse, and his thumb lingered just a fraction of a second too long. My skin tingled. I laughed, too loudly. The champagne didn't help. Nor did the soft jazz the band began playing after the cake was cut. Couples drifted onto the dance floor, and Daniel held out his hand. For old time's sake? I hesitated, then let him pull me to my feet. His hand was warm against my back, his breath soft on my cheek as we moved. I could feel the shape of him, the way his body filled the space around me. It was not innocent. Not at all. "Do you remember that night at the lake house?" he murmured. I stiffened. Of course I remembered. One August night, years ago. We'd been sent to my mother's friend's cabin for the weekend while our parents went to a conference. I was 26, still single and pretending to have it all together. He was 32, freshly divorced. We'd stayed up too late, drank cheap wine, and danced barefoot on the deck while cicadas hummed around us. Nothing happened, technically, but the tension that night had been electric. Unbearable. Vaguely, I said, though my cheeks burned. "I think about it sometimes," he said, his voice low. I looked up at him. His eyes were unreadable. "You do?" I always wondered what might have happened if I hadn't gone inside first. A beat passed. My heart thumped. I said nothing. That night, back in the hotel room with Alan, I couldn't sleep. He was snoring lightly, one arm draped over his belly, his face turned toward the wall. The room smelled like aftershave and old cologne. I went into the bathroom, sat on the closed toilet lid, and stared at myself in the mirror. Something had cracked open in me. A door I'd painted shut years ago was suddenly ajar. The next day, Daniel found me by the buffet table. He handed me a mimosa and a napkin. "My number," he said quietly, "in case you want to talk." I didn't say anything. I just folded the napkin and slipped it into my clutch. Back home, the days blurred. Alan returned to his crossword puzzles and predictable routines. I went back to work at the small accounting office I co-owned with a friend. But inside me, something churned. I didn't call Daniel. Not for 2 weeks. And then one afternoon, I did. I called him on a Wednesday. My fingers hovered over his number for a full minute before I pressed call. I told myself it was harmless, that I just wanted to hear his voice again, to see what it would feel like dipping a toe into a lake you know is freezing, but needing to know exactly how cold it is. He answered on the second ring. "Well," he said after a breath. I was starting to think I'd imagined that look in your eyes. I smiled despite myself. I shouldn't be calling. Probably not, he said, his voice low and warm. But I'm glad you did. We talked for nearly an hour. About nothing and everything. His work. He'd retired early from consulting and now ran a small vineyard outside Sonoma. Divorced once, no kids. He still played piano, still had that deep, gravelly laugh I remembered from late nights in our shared kitchen. He asked about my life, but not in the polite way people do out of obligation. He listened, and when I mentioned Alan, there was a pause, subtle but sharp enough to catch. Are you happy? He asked. The question sat between us like a dropped dish. I'm settled, I said, finally. He didn't respond for a moment. That's not what I asked. I almost hung up. But instead, I said, I don't know what I'm doing, Daniel. You don't have to know, he said. You just have to feel. That sentence clung to me for days. Like smoke in a sweater. We started texting. Little things. A photo of a glass of wine with a caption. Wishing you were here. A song link. A memory. Nothing overt, at first. Just breadcrumb trails of temptation. I'd see his name flash on my phone while Alan snored next to me in bed, or while I sat in traffic, and my stomach would flip in a way I hadn't felt since I was 30. Then came the message. I'll be in San Diego next weekend. Staying at the Delegate Room 314. No pressure. Just come if you want to see me. I stared at it for hours. Told myself I'd delete it. I didn't. Instead, I found myself packing an overnight bag on a quiet Saturday morning. Alan had gone golfing with his coworkers. I left a note. Spa day with Claire. Don't wait up. I arrived just after sunset. The Hotel del Coronado glowed with golden light, its towers etched against the pink sky. I walked through the lobby on legs that barely felt attached to my body. My reflection in the brass elevator door looked like someone else entirely, someone braver, or stupider, or both. Room 314. I knocked once. And then he opened the door. He was barefoot, wearing a white shirt unbuttoned at the top and dark jeans that hung low on his hips. His hair was damp from the shower. He looked at me as though I were a dream he wasn't sure would come true. I stepped inside. Neither of us spoke. He closed the door behind me, and I heard the latch click into place. That sound felt more significant than it should have, like crossing a threshold, no going back. He stepped closer, slowly, giving me time to stop him. I didn't. He touched my hair first, then the side of my face. His fingers traced along my jaw like he was remembering something, or confirming it still existed. My breath caught in my throat. You came, he whispered. I didn't plan to, I said, honestly. I was hoping you'd lie better than that, he teased, then kissed me before I could reply. It was not a soft, tentative kiss. It was deep, intentional. Years of wondering and restraint poured into a single breathless moment. I melted against him. His hands found my waist, then my hips, then slid up beneath my blouse. My skin came alive under his touch. It had been years, decades, maybe since someone touched me like that. Like I was something to be unwrapped, devoured, worshipped. We didn't make it to the bed right away. He lifted me onto the desk, pushing aside the notepad and pen like they were irrelevant clutter, his mouth on my neck, my hands tugging at his shirt, legs parting without thought. God, you're still so, he murmured into my collarbone. Don't, I said, breathless. Don't say things unless you mean them. He paused and looked up at me. I've meant everything since the day I met you. That broke me open. We undressed in pieces, savoring each reveal. I was nervous. My body had changed, aged, softened, but he looked at me like I was art. His lips traced every line, every freckle, every curve with reverence. When he finally entered me, it wasn't frantic. It was slow, intimate, almost unbearable in its intensity. He moved inside me like he was rediscovering something he thought he'd lost. I cried out once, quietly, not from pain but from the sheer overwhelming sensation of being truly seen, truly touched after so long. Afterward, we lay tangled together, our breathing gradually sinking. His fingers traced lazy circles on my back. You're not a mistake, he said into the quiet. Even if this is. I didn't answer. Because I didn't know what we were. I stayed until dawn. Slipped out while he was still sleeping, kissed his shoulder before I left. My phone buzzed as I pulled onto the freeway. Daniel, you looked back at me in the mirror. That's all I needed. I smiled through tears I couldn't explain. Back home, Alan asked nothing. I told him the spa was exactly what I needed. He nodded, already halfway through the newspaper. Life returned to normal. On the surface. But everything had changed. Inside, a fuse had been lit. The next time wasn't planned either. It was 3 weeks later. Daniel was in Los Angeles for a conference, and I was supposed to have dinner with an old friend, but she canceled last minute due to a migraine. At least, that's what I told Alan. In truth, I'd started carrying lingerie in the trunk of my car. Just in case. I texted Daniel around 4 p.m. Are you still in LA? He called me immediately. I'm at the Pendry. Suite 1105. Don't tease me, Claire. I'm already on the freeway, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. This time, when he opened the door, we didn't waste time on pleasantries. I was in his arms before the door had even latched. He kissed me like a man starving, and I responded in kind. We didn't speak much that night. There were no confessions, no guilt. Only need, raw and hungry and urgent. But afterward, as we lay beneath the soft hotel sheets, our limbs tangled like ivy. The quiet crept in. He touched my face gently. You don't talk much afterward. I don't know what to say, I admitted. You can say you want this, he said. That you need it. I do, I said. God help me, I do. That was the truth. I needed him like I needed air. He reminded me that I was still a woman, not just a wife or a mother or an aging silhouette in the bathroom mirror. With Daniel, I didn't have to be sensible or invisible. I could be hungry,
Desperate. Alive.
I told myself it wasn't an affair. Not really. I wasn't in love. I was just reclaiming something. But it became more than sex. It became texts in the middle of the night. Long phone calls during lunch breaks. Secret weekends in Paso Robles, Carmel, a cabin in Big Bear. I started to memorize the rhythm of his breathing, the cadence of his laugh. I knew the exact way his fingertips felt when they skimmed the inside of my wrist. I began to crave the sound of my name on his lips more than I craved anything else. Alan noticed something. Eventually. Not a change in my behavior. He never paid enough attention for that. But he started suggesting weekend plans, suddenly remembering anniversaries, even bringing home flowers once just because. It was guilt, I suppose, that made me try again. I let him take me to that new French place downtown. I wore the silk dress he used to like. He reached for my hand across the table, and for a moment, I almost believed we could find our way back. But when he kissed me goodnight, the touch felt like another man's clothes on my skin. Familiar, but wrong. Daniel, by contrast, made me feel like my body was a map he never stopped wanting to explore. He noticed things Alan hadn't in years. How I bit my lip when nervous, the small scar on my left thigh from falling off a bike at 13. He brought me things he knew I liked. An obscure book of poetry, imported chocolate with sea salt, a scarf in a shade of green that matched my eyes. Thoughtful things. Personal things. And then, one afternoon in late October, I made a mistake. It was small. Stupid. I left my phone on the kitchen counter, screen up, while I showered. A message flashed on the screen as I dried off. Daniel, last night is still on my lips. Can't stop thinking of the way you said my name. I heard the water running in the sink downstairs. Heard the silence that followed. When I came down, Alan was sitting at the table.
The phone was face down now.
He was sipping coffee, his jaw tight. Everything okay? I asked, my voice too bright. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded.
Yep.
Everything's fine. He didn't say anything else.
Not that day.
Not the next. But I knew. Something had shifted. That week, he stayed later at work. Didn't ask where I was going when I left for Pilates. I expected confrontation, but it never came. Just distance. A hollowing out of what was already half empty. Daniel noticed the change in me. You're somewhere else, he said, when we met at his vineyard one rainy Thursday. We were in the guest cottage, curled in front of the fireplace, a blanket over our bare legs. "I think Alan knows," I admitted. Daniel looked at me, searching. "Do you want him to?" "I don't know," I said. "I don't know what I want anymore." He touched my hand. "I know what I want." I didn't reply.
Couldn't.
Because a terrible truth was forming in my chest. This had never been about just needing to feel alive. Somewhere along the way, I'd started falling in love with him. I left early that night. The drive back was long, and the rain made the freeway blur. I cried quietly in the car, the kind of tears that come when you've let something go too far but can't imagine pulling it back. At home, Alan was asleep. His side of the bed smelled like mouthwash and something faintly antiseptic. I lay beside him, staring at the ceiling fan as it turned slowly above us, and I realized that for the first time in decades, I felt like a stranger in my own home. Not because I didn't belong, but because the version of me who once lived here no longer existed. She had vanished the moment Daniel touched her face and said, "You don't have to know. You just have to feel." And what I felt now was that something had to break. I don't remember the exact moment I realized I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. Maybe it was the night I lay awake listening to Alan's steady, oblivious breathing and realized I no longer felt guilt, only sorrow. Not for what I'd done, but for the years I had spent convincing myself that quiet, polite emptiness was what love became after a certain age. That comfort was a fair trade for passion. Or maybe it was the morning Daniel texted me simply, "I want to wake up next to you every day." And I didn't flinch. The problem with double lives is that they start to require double hearts. And mine couldn't keep the beat anymore. I was out of rhythm with everything. Meals tasted flat. Music that once soothed me made me restless. I snapped at Alan for leaving the fridge door open. I cried when I found a picture of us from our 15th anniversary, me in a red dress, laughing at something he'd just whispered. A stranger. Both of us. One night, I went to Daniel's place in Sonoma and stayed for 3 days. We didn't leave the house. We cooked together, took long walks through the vines, made love in every room like we were trying to memorize each other through skin. He played piano while I lay on the rug with a glass of wine, watching his hands move. And when he finished, I whispered, "You make me feel like I'm 30 again." He walked over, kissed the top of my head. "You are. Every time you look at me like that." That night, as we sat outside wrapped in one blanket under the stars, he said, "I don't want to be a secret anymore, Claire. I know it's messy, but I want you to choose. Not out of guilt, out of truth." I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't feel afraid of the future. I felt afraid of the past, of how much time I'd wasted living the right life instead of the real one. 2 days later, I told Alan. I came home on a Tuesday. The house was quiet. He was reading on the patio, glasses low on his nose, sipping iced tea. I sat down across from him and said his name once, softly. He looked up, and something in my face must have told him everything. "I've been seeing someone," I said, "for a while now." He didn't say anything at first, just nodded once, very slowly, as if he'd already known. "Is it serious?" he asked, voice steady. "Yes." He looked down at his tea, then back at me. "Is it over between us?" I hesitated. And that, more than any word I could have said, answered him. "I see," he said quietly. "Is it someone I know?" I swallowed. "Daniel." He blinked. "Your stepbrother?" I nodded, shame rising like a tide. "We're not blood. We were never raised together. It started as, it doesn't matter. I'm sorry, Alan. Truly. But this didn't happen because of him. It happened because I've been gone from this marriage for a long time, and I didn't even realize it." He stared at me for a long moment, and then said something that undid me. "I always thought you'd be the one to stay." I didn't cry in front of him. I waited until I was upstairs, packing a suitcase. I sat on the edge of the bed where we'd slept for over 20 years and sobbed silently into my palms. For what we had, for what we lost, for the comfort I was leaving behind. I moved out the next day. into a small rental not far from Daniel's vineyard, but not with him. Not yet. I needed space to breathe, to figure out who I was without a man on either side of me. The first night alone, I cooked myself a real meal, drank wine barefoot in the kitchen, danced to old Motown while the sauce simmered. I slept in the middle of the bed. The silence was different than I imagined. It wasn't lonely. It was wide open. Daniel respected my space. He didn't push, but he came over on Sundays, brought flowers, groceries, new music for me to hear. We made love slowly, tenderly, without rush. He held me like something fragile, not because I was broken, but because he understood I'd rebuilt myself. Alan and I divorced quietly.
No scouting.
No fights over property. We both knew there wasn't a villain in the story, just time, erosion, choices unmade. He wished me well, and I meant it when I wished the same for him. I saw him once, 6 months later, with a woman at the farmer's market. They were laughing over peaches, and he looked lighter somehow. I hoped she was teaching him how to see things again. I hoped he saw her. As for Daniel and me, we're still writing whatever this is. It's not perfect. We argue sometimes. We both carry our scars. But there's laughter. There's touch. There's fire. He still plays piano for me, and I still wear that green scarf he gave me, the one that makes me feel like someone's muse. And sometimes, when I wake up before him and watch him sleeping, his hand resting lightly over my stomach, our legs intertwined, I think about how close I came to never knowing this life could be mine, to living only the version of my life that looked right on paper. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: we get one shot. One short, strange, beautiful life. And if someone or something lights a fire in you that won't go out, you owe it to yourself to step toward it. Even if it makes no sense. Even if it's complicated. Even if you have to tear down the house to build the home you were meant to live in. Because desire doesn't ask for permission. And love, real love, doesn't always show up when it's convenient. But when it does, you'll know. And if you're brave, you'll answer it. Like I did. It's strange how easily something can shift. A single word, a glance, a touch that lingers just a second longer than it should. People think affairs happen in the dark, that they begin with lies or betrayal. But that's not how mine started. Mine began in the most ordinary of places, the kitchen. It was late May, and the heat had just begun to settle over the town like an unwelcome houseguest. My husband, David, was out in the garden, fussing with a sprinkler system he'd sworn he'd fixed last weekend. I was barefoot, half distracted, sipping on a watered-down iced tea while scrolling through a recipe I knew I wasn't going to use. The house was quiet except for the low hum of cicadas outside and the occasional clink of my glass on the granite countertop. Then the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Noah standing there, my husband's stepson from his first marriage. My stepson, too. Technically, though calling him that never felt quite right. He was 34, tall, lean, with that effortless kind of charm some men wear like cologne. It always hung on him, just enough to be noticed, but never overpowering. I'd known him since he was in college, back when he used to bring home his laundry and pretend not to listen when David and I argued in hushed tones after dinner. "Hey, Mindy," he said with a half-smile, like he already knew something I didn't. He was supposed to be living in Denver. But there he was, in a black t-shirt that clung to his chest, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder. "I'm here for a few weeks. Business trip got postponed. Figured I'd spend some time here." I smiled. Or something that felt like a smile. "You're always welcome, Noah."
Come in.
I didn't think of that moment as a turning point. Not yet. But looking back, everything after that started to unravel in slow, honey-thick threads. David greeted him like a son. I watched the two of them drink beer and talk about the Lakers while I folded laundry and pretended I wasn't noticing the way Noah's eyes found me across the room. Not in a bold way, not at first. But his gaze lingered. And I let it. I was 54 then. Not old, not young. Comfortable in the way women get after 30 years of marriage, the kind of comfort that wraps around you like a quilt in winter, but also sometimes feels like a weight. My body wasn't what it used to be, and I didn't care most of the time. But something about the way Noah looked at me, it made me aware of my hips, my neckline, the delicate skin behind my knees. He started running with me in the mornings. It was my ritual, early jogs before David woke, before the world got too loud. Noah asked to join once and then again, and then it became routine. He kept pace with me, teasing gently, offering me water, brushing his hand against the small of my back when we paused to stretch. Always innocent. Always almost. One morning, 2 weeks after he arrived, it happened. We were standing at the trail's end, the sun rising behind him, making his hair look like it had been dusted with gold. I bent down to tighten my shoelaces, and when I looked up, he was watching me. Not in that usual, flirtatious way. This was hungrier. Quiet and bold all at once. "You look beautiful when you sweat," he said. I laughed, because what else could I do? That's the worst compliment I've ever gotten. He stepped closer. "I'm serious. There's something raw about it. Honest." I should have said something. Shut it down. Changed the subject. But I didn't. Because in that moment, I remembered something I hadn't felt in years. That tingling pull in my stomach, the kind that made me feel like a woman again. Not a wife. Not a mother. A woman. "I should get back," I murmured. But I didn't move. Noah reached out, gently brushed a strand of damp hair from my cheek. His fingers grazed my skin like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to touch me, but he wanted to. Desperately. "We shouldn't," I whispered.
His voice was low.
"I know." But he kissed me anyway. It wasn't fireworks. It wasn't violent or rushed. It was soft. Intentional. The kind of kiss that says, "I've been thinking about this. I've imagined it. I've needed it." And I kissed him back. When we pulled away, I could feel my heart pounding like I'd just run 5 miles. I looked at him, his lips slightly parted, his eyes dark, serious. "This can't happen again," I said. He nodded. "Okay." But we both knew it would. The kiss haunted me. For days, it played on repeat in my mind. Not just the taste of it, the subtle trace of mint and morning coffee on his tongue, but the look in his eyes afterward. That quiet, smoldering certainty. It wasn't guilt I felt. Not yet. It was something more dangerous. Anticipation. At home, things went on as usual. David didn't notice the shift in the air, or in me. He was distracted, as he often was, immersed in his woodworking projects, local politics, or whatever vintage tool he'd picked up at the flea market. We had become so good at parallel living that he didn't see how I stared longer at the mirror that week. How I shaved above the knee again. How I started wearing perfume in the morning, even when I wasn't leaving the house. Noah didn't kiss me again that week. But something had changed between us. The way he looked at me, less playful, more intense. And I began responding in kind, in the smallest of ways. A hand resting too long on his shoulder as I passed. My bathrobe not tied as tightly when I walked into the kitchen. A shared glance while David was in the room, completely unaware. The tension between us built like static. One night, it broke. David had gone out with some of his buddies from the Rotary Club, some boys' night, that left me alone with a bottle of Merlot and my thoughts. I was curled on the couch in the den, barefoot, wearing one of those long, loose cardigans that hides nothing if it slips the wrong way. I was watching an old romantic film I'd seen too many times, but I wasn't really watching. I was waiting. Noah came in, barefoot too, holding a bowl of popcorn and that mischievous grin that now made my thighs tense. "Didn't want you to watch movies alone," he said, and sat beside me. Too close. I could smell the faint scent of his shampoo, woodsy, fresh. His knee brushed mine. I didn't move away. He handed me the bowl and let his fingers slide under mine for a moment too long. My breath caught. He noticed. Halfway through the film, I felt his hand on my thigh. It started innocently enough, resting there, warm and still. But then his thumb began to move, slow circles against my skin, just under the hem of my nightshirt. I looked at him.
He leaned in.
This time, when we kissed, it wasn't gentle. It was deep, searching, full of that slow-burning hunger we'd both been pretending not to feel. He pushed the bowl aside, reached for me, and I let him. God help me, I let him. We didn't go upstairs. Right there, in the den, on the couch where David and I had watched 1,000 movies, I spread my legs and let another man touch me like I hadn't been touched in years. Noah was patient, skilled, almost reverent. He undressed me slowly, like every inch of me was something he'd been dreaming about. And when he was inside me, he whispered my name so softly it didn't feel wrong. It felt like waking up after a long, cold sleep. Afterward, I sat there wrapped in a blanket, the room still spinning, my heart racing. Noah was in the kitchen, shirtless, pouring us water. When he came back, he kissed my shoulder and whispered, "You're not just sexy, Mindy. You're powerful." I laughed, but there were tears in my eyes. Because it had been years since I'd felt that. Years since someone made me feel seen. We told ourselves it was a one-time thing. Of course we did. But the lie was thin.
Weak.
It collapsed the very next afternoon. David was out getting mulch or something for the flower beds. Noah found me in the laundry room, folding towels, still smelling faintly of the fabric softener I always used. He didn't even say anything. Just walked in, shut the door, and pulled me into him. We didn't bother with pleasantries. The washer was still spinning as he lifted me onto the dryer and slid my panties down with one hand. We didn't speak, just breathing and biting and soft moans muffled into shoulders. It was rushed, thrilling, absurdly inappropriate.
And addicting.
It became a pattern, a rhythm. Quick glances in the kitchen, brushed fingers under the dinner table, a stolen kiss in the hallway. And whenever David was out, a grocery run, a haircut, a meeting, we found each other. On the stairs, in the garage. Once, even in the backyard after dark, against the fence with fireflies blinking around us. I was becoming someone I didn't recognize. And yet, I loved her. I felt alive again. Desired. Like a woman with secrets. But there were moments of silence, too. Of doubt. In the quiet of the night, lying beside David, his breath heavy, and even in sleep, I would stare at the ceiling and wonder, what am I doing? Who am I becoming? Then, the next morning, Noah would pass behind me at the coffee machine, his hand grazing the base of my spine, and my body would betray me all over again. He made me feel like I had stepped into another version of my life, one where I was still sexy, still wanted, not invisible, not just someone's wife. It wasn't just sex. That's the part that scared me. He started talking to me like I mattered. Really mattered. "Did you ever think about going back to school?" he asked one evening, while we sat on the deck, our knees touching under the table. David was inside watching the game. I laughed. "I'm 54, Noah. I think I've missed my window." "No, you haven't. You're smarter than most people I work with. You still have windows." That night, when he took me to bed again, it was slower, more tender. He kissed every inch of me like he was memorizing it. And I let him. But in the morning, reality always returned. So did the guilt. David made me eggs and kissed my cheek. He'd always been a good man. Not exciting, maybe. Not attentive in the ways that made a woman feel craved. But good.
Loyal.
The kind of man you built a life with. And yet, I was betraying him every chance I got. And the worst part? I didn't want to stop. The thing no one tells you about affairs is how ordinary the world still looks while your insides are unraveling. You still make dinner. You still buy paper towels and feed the dog. You still smile at the mailman. But inside, you are constantly spinning, a careful, lying woman balancing on a wire between desire and disaster. Noah and I were no longer pretending it was a mistake. There was no guilt-laced "this was the last time" anymore. We had crossed that line weeks ago. Now it was a pattern, deliberate, controlled, delicious, and dangerous. I started looking forward to David leaving. Isn't that horrible? A text from him, going to the hardware store, be back in an hour, would make my pulse quicken in places that had long been quiet.
I de text no.
He's gone. Sometimes I didn't even need to say anything. He'd already be coming down the stairs before the garage door closed. We learned how to move fast, how to be quiet. He could slip my underwear down and have me trembling against the kitchen counter in 2 minutes flat. And I loved it. God help me. I loved the danger of it all. The sounds I bit back, the moans I swallowed into his neck, the ridiculous ways I tried to keep my hair from looking too tousled after. But it wasn't always fast.
Some days it was soft.
Thoughtful. We'd lie in my bed, our bed, with the blinds barely cracked open, sunlight spilling across the sheets, and he'd kiss my knees, my thighs, my belly. Places no one had kissed in years. He'd hold my face afterward and whisper things that didn't feel borrowed from youth, things that felt earned.
Grown.
Like he saw me, not just the body I thought had lost its value. Once, he found my old journal. I'd hidden it in a drawer I thought no one touched, a silly leather thing I used to write in during my 40s, back when I still had hope that David and I could rediscover whatever had died between us. Noah read it.
And he cried.
"You were so lonely," he said, gently touching the corner of my eye with his thumb. I didn't say anything. I just let him press his lips to my eyelids, to the skin just below my ear, to the curve of my neck where I still remembered being 27 and full of dreams. That night, I let him take photos of me. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I wanted to be seen. Truly seen, through someone else's lens. Maybe I wanted proof that I had been beautiful again, even if only in secret. He was careful, respectful. He took his time. My robe slipped off my shoulder. The sheet barely covered my hips. My eyes in those photos look wild.
Alive.
I made him promise never to show anyone.
He swore.
One night, it almost fell apart. We'd been careless. It had been late. David had gone to bed early after too much wine at dinner. Noah and I had found ourselves alone in the garage, of all places, beside a dusty treadmill and an old Christmas wreath. He pressed me against the workbench, hands under my skirt, mouth trailing down my collarbone. I was dizzy, hips already grinding against his thigh when the garage door creaked.
It was David.
I barely had time to fix my skirt. Noah ducked behind a shelf, pretending to look for an old toolbox. David yawned, didn't even look at me, just mumbled something about needing an extension cord. He grabbed it, muttered goodnight, and left. Noah and I stood frozen. Then he laughed. Quiet, reckless. "I'm starting to think you like the risk," he said. I slapped his arm. "We were almost caught, you idiot." He stepped closer. "Yeah, but you're still wet." My face flushed hot.
I was.
God, I was. We didn't stop. But something in me began to fray. Not from guilt. That ship had sailed. But from something deeper. Confusion. A terrifying question that began whispering to me in the early mornings. What if I'm in love with him? I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was lust. A fantasy. A powerful cocktail of hormones and ego and midlife madness. But then he started saying things. Asking questions. Would you ever leave him? I don't know, I answered once, my voice trembling. He didn't press. Later that night, he made love to me like he was trying to change my mind, like his body could convince me to walk out the door and never come back. And for a few minutes, I believed it could. Then morning came. I made eggs again. David kissed me again. The dishwasher beeped, the calendar on the fridge reminded me of my mammogram, and the spell broke again. I was living two lives. One of them was safe, familiar, quiet. The other was Noah, fire, ache, danger, laughter, secrets whispered into the dark. And I didn't know which one was real anymore. One morning, something unexpected happened. I was standing at the kitchen sink when David came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. It had been years since he touched me like that. "Hey," he said softly, "you've been glowing lately. What's your secret?" I froze. My breath caught. My body didn't know how to respond. I was suddenly aware of every lie I'd told him. Every orgasm I'd faked. Every time I told him I was just tired while I still ached from Noah's hands. I turned slowly, smiled weakly. "Just feeling good, I guess." He nodded.
Kissed my cheek.
"Whatever it is, keep doing it. I like seeing you happy." And just like that, the shame came crashing back. I wasn't just lying to him. I was betraying a kind man who had built a life around trusting me. I was destroying something that had been my shelter for 30 years. And yet, I couldn't stop. Because with Noah, I felt something I didn't know I still could.
Possibility.
Summer was fading. The light changed, softer now. Everything felt quieter, like the world was slowly holding its breath. And I was holding mine with it, waiting for something to break. Noah and I had started talking less during the day. Not out of anger or cooling passion, but because we didn't need the constant texting, the flirting, the coded messages. We understood each other without words. A glance across the room during dinner. A casual touch when no one was looking. A whisper against my ear as he passed behind me in the hallway. We had become fluent in secrecy. But secrets have a weight. And mine had begun to press on me in ways I could no longer carry with grace. I caught myself drifting mid-conversation with David, staring too long into the bathroom mirror, questioning everything, not just the marriage, not just the affair, but myself. What kind of woman does this? What does it mean to live honestly? And do I even remember how? Then it happened. It was a Sunday afternoon. David had invited a few neighbors over for a casual barbecue. He was flipping burgers out back. I was in the kitchen, prepping potato salad, barefoot and distracted, when Noah walked in. He stood there, watching me for a moment. His eyes, always expressive, looked darker today. "What's wrong?" I asked softly. He hesitated. "Then, I got a job offer. Out of state. Seattle." The air left the room. I turned to face him fully. "Are you taking it?" "I think I have to," he said. "It's a good opportunity. And this can't go on forever, can it?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the bowl of mayonnaise-covered potatoes across the room. But I just nodded. Slowly, quietly, because I had known. Deep down, I had known we were living on borrowed time. "When?" I asked. "A month," he said. "Less." I nodded again. Something behind my ribs cracked, not loudly, not enough to break me, but enough to bruise. We didn't say much else that day. He helped carry out the drinks, sat across the patio from me, politely chatting with neighbors. David laughed and slapped him on the back. I watched the man I loved, my husband, smile at the man I was sleeping with. And I thought, this is madness. But that night, after the last guest had left, David went upstairs, and Noah and I found each other in the dark kitchen one last time.
We didn't speak.
We just kissed, long, slow, aching. Then I led him to the bedroom. Not the guest room.
Ours.
We made love in David's bed. Not out of cruelty. Not out of spite. But because it was the only place left where the truth could live for a few stolen hours.
And it was different.
Not desperate. Not frantic. It was the kind of lovemaking people think stops happening after 50, deep, intentional, filled with unspoken goodbyes. I cried afterward. Quietly. He held me. "I wish I'd met you first," he whispered into my hair. I didn't respond. I just buried my face in his chest and listened to the rhythm of a heart I could never keep. The next few weeks blurred. He packed. I cooked. We avoided talking too much, too directly. We had small moments, a hand on my lower back as I reached for a wine glass, a last quick kiss in the laundry room, a shared cigarette on the porch at 2 a.m., something I hadn't done in decades. I didn't tell David. I almost did twice. Once over coffee, once in bed. But both times, I saw the lines in his face, the familiarity of his kindness, and the slow way he looked at me like I still mattered, even when he no longer knew how to say it. And I couldn't. I just couldn't. The night before Noah left, we met in the garage again, where it had all started. "I'll miss you," he said.
I already do, I replied.
He kissed my palm. "Don't disappear again, Mindy. You're not invisible. Don't let yourself fade." I nodded, lips trembling. And then he left. No long goodbye. No drama. Just a car pulling out of the driveway and the soft thump of my heart landing in my stomach as the taillights disappeared around the corner. Weeks passed. The ache softened but never left. I still felt him sometimes. In the shower, where he once lifted me against the wall. In the quiet of afternoon light spilling across the carpet, where we once lay tangled in whispers. I kept a photo. Not one of those photos, just a simple one. Him at the lake, smiling at something I had said, hair ruffled, sun on his skin. I kept it in my drawer, beneath old scarves. David, and I continued. I don't know what else to call it. We didn't reinvent our marriage, but we didn't let it rot either. One night, he touched me differently.
Slower.
Like he remembered something. And I let him. I didn't cry. I didn't compare. Because the truth is, you don't always choose between one life and another. Sometimes you just keep breathing inside the one you've built, even after a storm has passed through it. But something did change. I started painting again. Small canvases, mostly flowers and old barns, nothing fancy. I signed up for a weekend art retreat. David encouraged it. I smiled more. I started wearing lipstick again, even on Tuesdays. And sometimes, when I passed the mirror, I saw her, the woman he woke up, the one I thought I'd lost. Noah was gone, but I was still here, and I was somehow still becoming. I suppose there's no clean way to begin a story like this. If I were braver, I'd say it out loud. I'm a married woman who had an affair. But I've learned people don't want the truth. They want redemption arcs. They want explanations, excuses. They want me to tell them that I was lonely, neglected, or that he forced himself into my life. But none of that would be true. I walked into it with my eyes open, and I would do it again. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Claire. I turned 53 last spring. I've been married to my husband, Daniel, for 27 years. We live in a quiet suburb outside of Portland, in a cedar-sided house with a well-trimmed lawn and neighbors who wave, but never ask too much. We have 2 grown children, both out of the house. Daniel and I sleep in a king-sized bed with a dip in the middle. We have dinner every evening around 7, and most weekends we go to Costco together, buy wine we never finish, and talk about replacing the deck, but never do. We are the picture of stability. So maybe that's where the rot began. It was last August when Tom came to visit. My stepbrother. That word, stepbrother, feels too formal to describe someone I once tackled into a pile of leaves when we were kids. Someone who used to sneak ice cream sandwiches to me before dinner and sit cross-legged on the floor of my bedroom while I read magazines out loud. Our parents had married when I was 11 and he was 13. His father, my stepfather, was a calm, disciplined man who balanced out my flighty, artistic mother. They stayed married for 15 years before quietly splitting when I was already grown and gone. I hadn't seen Tom much after that. Life pulled us in different directions.
He joined the Navy.
I went to college. He got married. I got married.
He divorced.
I didn't. The last time I saw him in person was my mother's funeral, and even then, it was a blur of handshakes and casseroles. But earlier this year, he reached out. Said he'd be in Portland for work, something to do with shipping logistics, and would love to stop by. He hadn't seen Daniel in decades. He said he missed our old family talks. I didn't think much of it. I was flattered. A little nostalgic. I even made lasagna from scratch that night, something I hadn't done since the kids left the house. Daniel liked him immediately. They talked about football and stocks and something about vintage cars that bored me out of my mind. I watched them from the kitchen as I wiped down the counters, pretending not to notice how Tom had changed. His shoulders were broader. His voice deeper. He had this quiet confidence I didn't remember. His smile came slow, but when it did, it stayed just a little longer than polite. He smelled like cedar and clean soap. That detail stuck with me more than it should have. That night, after dinner, Daniel went upstairs to check the lock on the back window. We'd had some neighborhood kids messing around recently, and I sat across from Tom on the back patio, wine in hand, the air thick with late summer heat. "You look good, Claire," he said, and it wasn't a casual compliment. It was loaded. Intentional. I laughed, nervously, tugging at my cardigan. "Well, I clean up for company." He tilted his head. No, I mean it. You look better now than when we were kids. Like you've grown into yourself. I should have deflected. I should have said something sisterly and safe. But I didn't. Instead, I took another sip of wine and looked him dead in the eye. You look different too. Better, he asked. Different, I repeated, but I knew I was lying. He looked like temptation. Something changed between us in that moment. Nothing physical. No lines crossed. But we both knew. After that, he stayed in town for a few more days. Said the hotel downtown was overpriced and offered to crash in our guest room if we didn't mind. Daniel was thrilled, said it was nice to have another man around. Someone to balance out the estrogen. Each morning, Tom joined me in the kitchen before Daniel woke up. We drank coffee and talked. About everything. About nothing. He remembered things I'd forgotten. My obsession with turquoise jewelry, the way I used to tuck my hair behind my ears when I was nervous. He watched me like he was cataloging me, piece by piece. The third morning, I caught him watching me stretch to reach the top shelf. His eyes lingered on my hips. I never realized how beautiful you were back then, he said quietly. I turned around, heart thudding. You shouldn't say that. Why not? Because I'm married. He stepped closer. Does he even see you anymore? I couldn't answer. Not truthfully. That afternoon, Daniel had a dentist appointment and asked if I could stay home with Tom, maybe take him to the old trails near the creek we used to hike as kids. I said yes. Of course I did. We drove in silence, the radio low. The trailhead was quiet, empty except for a few mountain bikers in the distance. The late summer sun filtered through the trees, warm and golden. I wore shorts for the first time in months, feeling self-conscious, but also alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. Halfway down the trail, I stopped. I'm sweating like a pig, I said, trying to fan my neck. Tom stepped behind me, pulled my hair off my shoulders. His fingers were warm against my skin. Let me. My breath caught. He didn't move. His hand stayed there, gently, like he was waiting for me to pull away. I didn't. Then he kissed me. Soft at first, hesitant, like he was giving me a chance to stop it. But I didn't. I kissed him back. Harder than I expected myself to. We didn't have sex then, not yet. But the dam had broken. I remember the drive home like a blur, my lips still swollen, my mind spinning. That night, I stood naked in front of the bathroom mirror while Daniel brushed his teeth. He glanced at me, then looked back down at his toothpaste. You okay? He mumbled through foam. I nodded. Just warm. But the truth was I was on fire. The next day, Daniel went to work. I stayed home. Tom came into the kitchen wearing nothing but low-slung sweatpants, his hair wet from the shower. You're playing with fire, I told him. He walked up behind me, pressed his chest to my back, his hands tracing the hem of my robe. Then burn with me. I let him touch me, right there against the kitchen counter. His hands were rough, insistent. I remember the cold granite against my stomach, the way he pulled the robe down just enough to expose one shoulder, then the other. I remember the sounds I made, the way I bit down on a dish towel to keep from crying out too loud. Afterwards, I sat on the floor, knees weak, robe open. He knelt beside me, kissed the side of my face. I've wanted this for a long time, he whispered. That's when I knew this wasn't just lust. Not entirely. He had wanted me. Not the version of me I showed the world, but me. The full, complicated, aging, aching me. And I wanted him back. It didn't end there. It couldn't. The next morning felt different. I didn't feel guilty, not exactly. Not in the way you'd expect. There was no violent rush of shame, no tears in the shower or silent self-flagellation. I felt shaken, yes. Exposed. But also electric. As if some part of me had been asleep for years and finally cracked open like a window after a long winter. The air rushing, it was equal parts sweet and dangerous. Tom and I barely spoke that morning. Not in the strained, regretful way that follows a mistake, but like two people who'd just joined a pact. Daniel left for work around 7:30, same as always, his routine so ingrained I could recite it like a prayer. He kissed my cheek, his lips cool and unthinking. You look flushed, he said absently. Didn't sleep great, I murmured. He nodded, then was gone. I heard the door shut. I heard his car back out of the driveway. And then it was just Tom and me. He appeared in the kitchen a few minutes later, wearing jeans and one of Daniel's old t-shirts, still barefoot, hair slightly damp. He didn't smile.
He didn't ask how I felt.
Instead, he stepped behind me at the sink, pressed his hand low against my back, and whispered, I've been hard since last night. My knees nearly buckled. I can't, I started, but his hand slid up my sides, not hurried, not frantic. Just steady. Possessive. My body answered him before my mouth could. We didn't even make it to a bed that time. It happened against the hallway wall, slow, deliberate, and overwhelming. The kind of intimacy that floods your senses and leaves you dumb and shaking. When it was over, we lay on the carpet in a patch of sunlight, silent. Do you regret it? I asked finally. He looked at me, serious. Not for a second. I didn't say it back, but I felt it in my bones. After that day, everything in my life split into before and after. Before Tom came back into my life, I had been Claire, the wife, the mother, the dependable one.
I cooked, I plannet, I volunteered.
I lived inside a calendar full of dentist appointments and dinner parties. But after I became something else. Something I'd forgotten I could be. Desired.
Bold. Alive.
I wasn't stupid. I knew the risk. I wasn't some naive girl sneaking around behind a high school boyfriend. I was a 53-year-old woman with a mortgage and a husband who trusted me. And yet every moment I spent with Tom made me crave the next. Every time I swore it would be the last time, he'd find some new way to touch me that made me fall apart all over again. He stayed in the guest room, and we developed a code of silence. We never texted about it, never acknowledged anything when Daniel was in the room. But late at night, when the house was quiet and I couldn't sleep, I'd find myself slipping out of bed and into the hall. Sometimes, he'd already be waiting at his door. There was a night, Thursday, I think, when Daniel fell asleep early after 2 glasses of wine. I lay beside him for 20 minutes, heart pounding, listening to the rhythm of his breath. Then I crept out, wearing nothing but a robe. Tom opened his door the moment I knocked. He didn't say a word,
just stepped aside and let me in.
We made love quietly, almost reverently, like it was something sacred. He kissed every inch of me, even the places I was self-conscious about. Especially those places. Why do you do that? I whispered once, as he pressed his lips to the stretch marks on my stomach. Because they're part of you, he said. And I want all of you. I cried that night. Not loud, heaving sobs. Just a single tear that slipped down as he held me in the dark, his fingers tracing circles on my back. I hadn't been touched like that in years. But of course, real life doesn't stay paused forever. The following week, Daniel announced that his sister was coming to town and needed the guest room for 2 nights. I smiled and nodded like a dutiful wife, but inside I panicked. Tom might need to find a hotel, Daniel said offhandedly. Unless he doesn't mind crashing on the couch. Tom played along perfectly. No worries, man. Couch is fine. That night, I barely looked at him during dinner.
My nerves were raw.
I felt exposed in my own kitchen, every clink of silverware too loud, every glance from Tom too pointed. After Daniel went to bed, I came downstairs under the guise of checking the thermostat. Tom was stretched out on the couch, shirtless, scrolling his phone. He looked up. You okay? I shook my head, suddenly on the verge of tears. I hate this. I feel insane. He sat up, pulled a blanket over his lap. Come here. I can't. She's right upstairs. I won't touch you. Just sit with me.
So I did.
I curled up next to him like I used to do when I was a teenager, and he was the only safe thing in my life. He wrapped his arm around me, kissed the top of my head. I think about you all the time, he whispered. Even before this? Especially before this.
I turned to him, stunned.
You mean back then? He nodded. Even when we were kids. I knew it wasn't normal, but I couldn't help it. I always felt something for you. That shook me. Because I had 2. Even as a girl, I remembered thinking of him differently. Not in a sexual way, not then, but something deeper. A closeness that didn't feel like sibling affection. More like the magnetism of two people who were meant to orbit each other. And now we were finally close enough to collide. The next day, his flight was scheduled. He was supposed to leave by 11 a.m. I woke early, restless, and met him outside by the car while Daniel showered upstairs. We didn't kiss. We just stood there in the cool morning air. The distance between us unbearable. I could cancel my flight, he said.
No, y whisperat.
You should go. He reached out, cupped my face in both hands. Claire, this doesn't feel like a fling. It's not. Then what do we do? I swallowed hard. We wait.
We think.
We figure out what this means. He nodded, reluctant. Will you write me? No, I said, surprising even myself. But you'll know when I'm ready. Then he got into the car, started the engine, and drove away. I stood in the driveway until he was out of sight, my heart heavier than it had been in years. But it wasn't over. Not even close. What came next would test everything I thought I knew about myself, my marriage, my body, my desires. 3 days after Tom left, I woke up crying. Not loud. Not even dramatic. Just quiet tears on my pillow while Daniel slept beside me, his back turned, his breathing even and shallow. I watched the ceiling, counting the tiny cracks in the plaster, feeling like someone had scooped something out of me and left the space hollow and echoing. I didn't hear from Tom. Not a text. Not a call. No cryptic messages. And I'd told him not to write, hadn't I? I'd insisted on it, told him it was cleaner this way, smarter. But now I was haunted by his absence. His silence was deafening. It followed me everywhere. Into the grocery store, into the garden, even into bed at night. And Daniel, he hadn't noticed a thing. He was the same, affectionate in a vague, distant way. Always asking if I needed anything. Always assuming I didn't. One night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, wearing nothing but a towel. I stared at my reflection for a long time. I saw the soft sag of my belly, the crow's feet around my eyes, the stretch marks that curled like soft ribbons down my hips. But I also remembered how Tom had kissed each of those marks, like they were treasures. My body had been invisible for years, until he made me feel like art. A week passed. Then another. The silence was unbearable, so I broke it. I wrote him an email.
Just a few lines.
No subject.
No greeting.
I can't sleep. I can't think straight. I miss the way you look at me. He replied 5 hours later. I haven't looked at another woman since I left your driveway. I didn't even make it through the rest of the day before I responded. And just like that, the fire was lit again. We started emailing carefully.
No sexting.
No dirty photos. We weren't teenagers. This was worse, more dangerous, more addictive. It was emotional. It was intimate. Some days we wrote only once. Some days we sent 10 messages before noon. We talked about music, memories, the things we'd never said aloud before. I told him about how Daniel hadn't really touched me in years. Not the way a man should touch a woman. How routine had slowly strangled all passion from our marriage until I felt like a well-dressed ghost moving from room to room. He told me he hadn't been in love in over a decade. That his marriage had made him feel small, controlled, sexless. I don't want to just exist anymore, he wrote. Neither did I. By October, we'd made a plan. Tom had a conference in Seattle. 3 hours away. He suggested I come. Just for the weekend. No one would know. Daniel was scheduled for a golf trip with a friend from college. I'll be gone anyway, I told him casually. Taking a few days to visit my cousin in Olympia. Daniel didn't ask questions. He kissed my forehead and helped me load the car, completely unaware that I was going to be with another man. And not just any man. My stepbrother. I met Tom in a hotel near Pike Place, the kind with too many pillows and dim, romantic lighting. I arrived first, heart pounding so hard I had to sit down before I could take off my coat. The knock came just after 4 p.m. When I opened the door and saw him standing there, I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel fear. I felt home. He stepped inside and dropped his bag, And then we were kissing, stumbling, stripping, devouring each other with a hunger that had only grown in the weeks apart. We didn't even make it to the bed. We ended up on the floor by the window, tangled in half-buttoned shirts and moans muffled against skin. He knew my body like he'd studied it, like it was a poem he'd memorized and could now recite with his hands. Later, as the city lights flickered through the window, we lay in bed, bare and unashamed. "I've never felt this close to someone," he said softly. I turned to him. "Not even when we were kids?"
He shook his head.
"Especially not then. It was always you, Claire. But I never thought I'd have you." "You don't have me," I whispered. His jaw tensed. "Then why are you here?" I didn't answer. Because the truth scared me. I didn't know who I was anymore. A faithful wife? A traitor? A woman rediscovering herself? Maybe all of them. The weekend passed in a blur of soft sheets, whispered confessions, and long, slow touches. We ordered room service. We talked late into the night. We explored each other's minds with the same curiosity we explored each other's bodies. By the time Sunday arrived, I felt raw. Tom walked me to my car in the underground garage, his hand wrapped tightly around mine like he was afraid I'd slip through his fingers. "Don't go back to him," he said quietly. I froze. He stepped in closer. "I know what we're doing is messy, but you can't tell me you don't feel this. Not just the sex. All of it. You and me, it's real." My throat tightened. "I have a life," I whispered. "A marriage. A reputation. I can't just throw it all away for this."
"For love," he said.
"Call it what it is." But I wasn't ready. I wasn't brave enough. So I left. Back home, things felt muted. Daniel never suspected. He was in a good mood from his trip, chatting about weather and traffic and old stories from college. I smiled and nodded in all the right places, but I felt like a foreigner in my own skin. I couldn't stop comparing. His kisses were dry and quick. His hands were mechanical. He touched me out of routine, not desire. One night, he came up behind me while I was folding laundry, wrapped his arms around my waist. "I missed you," he said softly. I nodded, but my heart twisted. I didn't miss him. I missed feeling alive. And that feeling had a name.
Tom.
I didn't plan for it to happen again. But of course it did. 2 weeks later, he showed up. No warning. Just knocked on the door in the middle of the afternoon while Daniel was at work. I opened it, breathless, stunned. "What are you doing here?" "I couldn't wait anymore," he said and pulled me into him, his kiss fierce and desperate. We didn't speak again for a long time. This time, we made it to the bedroom. The same bed I shared with Daniel. The same sheets. The same headboard. I should have felt sick. Instead, I felt whole. Afterwards, as we lay tangled in the aftermath, I stared at the ceiling and whispered, "What are we doing?" Tom turned to me, brushed a strand of hair from my face. "We're waking up." I knew then that I couldn't keep this up forever. I was balancing on a knife's edge, and someone was bound to fall. But I also knew one thing with terrifying certainty. I didn't want to go back to sleep. By November, the guilt began to set in, not in sharp bursts like a slap across the face, but in slow, creeping waves. It didn't come when I lay with Tom, or when he whispered my name against my neck, or even when we stole afternoons in hotel rooms under aliases and paid in cash. No, it came later, at odd moments. Like when Daniel poured my coffee without asking how I liked it, simply because he already knew. Or when I found a decades-old anniversary card tucked into a drawer, his handwriting so familiar it broke something in me. There was a time when I would have cried from shame. Now, I cried because I didn't miss that woman anymore. I didn't want to be the good wife. I didn't want the tidy house and the carefully scheduled intimacy and the quiet dinners with our couple's friends who all wore the same perfume and told the same stories. I wanted Tom. The affair became impossible to hide. Not because we were careless. We weren't. We still never texted anything explicit, never left traces, never said the wrong names at the wrong times. But my body gave me away. Daniel noticed first in small ways. He started watching me across the dinner table, his eyes a little more curious. He touched me more often, as if trying to reassert some claim. And one night, out of nowhere, he asked, "Are you happy?"
I dropped the spoon I was drying. What?
With us. With this life. I turned slowly. "Why are you asking?" He hesitated. "I don't know. You seem different lately." I forced a smile, the kind that didn't touch my eyes. "Midlife hormones, probably." He nodded, like that made perfect sense. But his brow stayed furrowed, his hand resting too long on the counter, as if anchoring himself. I went upstairs, locked the bathroom door, and cried for a long time. Not because he'd figured it out, because I knew he hadn't, and yet part of him still sensed the shift. And that kind of knowing, the quiet knowing, felt more tragic than confrontation. One cold Sunday morning, Tom called me. He never called. That was our rule. But he did. His voice was rough, too early, too intimate. "I had a dream about you last night. I was in the garage, cleaning out old paint cans and boxes of Christmas lights. Was it a good one?" "It was. And then I woke up and felt like I'd lost you." Something in me cracked. "I'm here," I whispered.
Not really, he said.
"You're still choosing him." I didn't answer. Tom exhaled slowly. "I can't keep doing this, Claire. I love you. I need to know, are you ever going to leave him?" It wasn't the first time he'd asked, but it was the first time he asked without hope in his voice. And I
didn't know what to say.
"I don't have an answer," I finally said. "I wish I did." "I'm not going to be your secret forever," he said gently. "I deserve more than stolen weekends." "You do," I said, the ache in my chest growing. "You deserve everything." "Then why won't you give it to me?" I couldn't speak. We sat in silence until he hung up. I stood there in the cold garage, surrounded by half-forgotten holiday decorations, my breath visible in the air, and realized the affair had stopped being an escape. It had become a question, one I could no longer avoid. The breaking point came in December. Daniel planned a romantic weekend getaway for our anniversary. A cabin near the coast, just the two of us. He booked massages, brought champagne, made an effort. It should have melted me. Instead, I felt like a guest in someone else's fantasy. The food was fine. The bed was soft. The conversation was gentle, easy, predictable. But I was not there. My body was there, dressed in soft sweaters and expensive scarves. But my mind, my heart, they were 3 hours north, in a cramped apartment above a bookstore where Tom lived now alone. The final night, Daniel touched me. Tenderly, respectfully, like someone tending to an old injury. And for the first time in my life, I imagined someone else while being with my husband. When it was over, he curled around me and whispered, "I love you." I stared at the ceiling and felt a tear slip silently across my temple. "I know," I whispered. The drive home was quiet. I watched the trees blur past the window, my hands in my lap, and I made the decision without even speaking it. I couldn't live like this anymore. 2 days later, I asked Tom to meet me. Not at a hotel. Not in secret. Just a quiet coffee shop 20 minutes outside town. He walked in looking older than he had in October. Tired. Thinner. But when he saw me, his face lit up like it used to. "I didn't think you'd come," he said. "I wasn't sure I would." He sat across from me, his hand covering mine. "What is it?" he asked gently. "Tell me." I took a breath. "I'm going to tell Daniel." He froze. "I don't know what happens after that," I added. "I'm not promising I'll be ready for anything right away. I might need space. I might need time. But I can't live 2 lives anymore." His eyes glistened. "Are you sure?" "No," I said. "But I'm more sure than I've been about anything in years." He nodded slowly. "Okay, then I'll wait." And just like that, we sat there in quiet agreement. Not as lovers sneaking behind backs, but as 2 people on the brink of something real and terrifying. I told Daniel that evening. He sat at the kitchen table while I stood by the sink, unable to look at him directly. "There's someone else," I said. The silence was profound. After a long minute, he cleared his throat. "How long?" I hesitated. "A few months." His hands trembled slightly on the table. He didn't yell, didn't call me names. He just looked broken. "Is it serious?" he asked, voice low. "Yes," I whispered. "It is." He nodded, slowly, mechanically, then stood up, walked past me, and climbed the stairs. That night, we didn't speak. The next morning, he packed a small bag and left for his sister's. I sat alone at the kitchen table, the same one where we'd shared hundreds of meals. The same table where I'd once pretended to be happy. Now, I wasn't pretending anymore. Tom came over that evening. Not to celebrate, not to claim anything, just to hold me. We lay together in the quiet, the house feeling too big, too full of memory. He didn't speak until I did. "I don't know what happens now," I said. "You don't have to," he whispered. "Just let yourself feel." And I did. I let myself feel the grief, the loss, the guilt, and underneath it all, the freedom. It's been nearly a year now. Daniel and I separated quietly. No public drama. Just two adults with too much history and not enough passion left to pretend anymore. Tom and I didn't rush into living together. We took it slow, careful, honest. Some days, I still feel like I'm standing on a cliff's edge, wind whipping through me, unsure if I've made the right choices. But most days I feel like I've finally come home to myself. And in that quiet, steady love Tom gives me, the kind that doesn't need hiding or shame, I've found something I didn't even know I was missing. Myself. And this time, I'm not going back to sleep. It started the summer I turned 54. The year our youngest left for college, the year my husband stopped touching me like he used to, the year my stepbrother moved in for just a few weeks. I remember the exact day because it was hot, late August, and I was standing in our kitchen, wiping down the countertop even though it was already clean. One of those nervous habits I'd developed over the years. Busy hands to silence a busy mind. Michael, my husband of 27 years, had left for the office early that morning, barely brushing my cheek with his lips. He'd been that way for the last few years, distracted, tired, disinterested. We used to make love like we had something to prove. Now it was all routines and maybe later, and separate sides of the bed with a gulf between us that grew wider each season. And then came Jack. He pulled into our driveway in that old silver truck I hadn't seen in over a decade. Same California plates. Same dent in the front fender. I hadn't seen him in almost 20 years, not since our parents' messy divorce when I was 35 and he was 29. He stepped out and smiled at me across the yard, sunglasses in hand, his hair longer than I remembered, a touch of gray at his temples. But he still had that easy confidence, that smirk that always bordered on trouble. "Hey, sis," he said, using the word like a joke, because we'd never really been siblings in any meaningful way. Our parents married when I was in college. By then, we were practically adults, two strangers forced into family photos and awkward holiday meals. But we'd always had a strange connection, one I never spoke about, even to myself. I stepped outside, shielding my eyes from the sun. "You're early." Traffic was kind. He reached over and gave me a one-armed hug. He smelled like the road, dust, leather, a hint of something citrusy. "Thanks again for letting me crash for a bit." It was Michael's idea, actually. Jack had hit a rough patch after a divorce and a failed landscaping business. He was driving east to restart his life, and Michael, ever the gracious host, had insisted he stay with us until he figured things out.
"He's family," Michael had said.
"It's the least we can do." Michael didn't know that Jack used to flirt with me back in the day, that I used to fantasize about what it would feel like to let him. That night, we had dinner on the back patio. Jack was funny and charming, spinning stories about his road trip and how he'd managed to charm his way out of 3 speeding tickets with nothing more than a smile and a wink. I watched him as he talked, the way his hands moved when he described something, the curve of his forearm, the crease in his smile. He caught me staring once and gave me that look, half smirk, half dare. It made something tighten low in my belly, something I hadn't felt in years. Michael went to bed early, claiming a migraine. Jack and I stayed out on the patio, drinking wine and listening to the cicadas. I can't believe how long it's been, I said, swirling the last sip in my glass. 20 years, give or take, he said. You haven't changed. I laughed. You're full of shit. He leaned back in his chair, legs stretched out, his voice low.
Okay, fine.
You've changed, but in the kind of way that makes a man wish he knew you better. I looked away, heart thudding. It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. Like he was testing the waters. Like he remembered everything I'd tried to forget. That night, lying in bed beside my sleeping husband, I stared at the ceiling and thought about Jack's hands. The way he looked at me when he said I'd changed. It was nothing. I told myself that.
Just words.
A bit of harmless flirtation. But something had shifted. The next day, I caught Jack coming out of the shower, towel slung low around his hips, droplets sliding down his chest. He didn't seem embarrassed. Didn't rush to cover up. He just smiled and said, "Morning," as if nothing was out of the ordinary. But something was. I started paying attention. Not just to him, but to myself. How I started wearing lip gloss again. How I styled my hair before he came into the kitchen. How I laughed too hard at his jokes. How I let my hand linger on his shoulder when I passed him in the hallway. Michael never noticed. He was buried in work, in spreadsheets and client calls, always too tired, too stressed. We hadn't had sex in over 6 months. One afternoon, Jack and I went to Home Depot to pick up a few things for the backyard. On the way back, he pulled into an old trailhead off the highway, a place we used to hike when we were younger. We got out and walked, just talking about the past, our lives, how fast time was slipping by. When we reached a clearing, he turned to me. Do you ever wonder what your life might have been like if you'd made different choices? I swallowed hard. Sometimes. He stepped closer. Close enough that I could smell him again. That same road-worn mix that made me dizzy. I used to think about you, he said.
A lot.
I couldn't speak. He brushed a strand of hair from my cheek, his fingers warm against my skin. I'm probably crossing a line here, he murmured. I closed my eyes. Maybe. But I didn't move away. His lips were on mine before I could stop him, soft, hesitant at first. Then hungrier, deeper. I kissed him back, my hands sliding into his hair, pulling him closer, like I'd been waiting years to do it. When we finally pulled apart, I was breathless. We should go, I whispered. Yeah, he said, voice hoarse. Probably. We didn't talk much on the drive home. But everything had changed. That night, I dreamed about him. Not just about the kiss, but more. Skin against skin. His mouth on my neck. My legs wrapped around his hips. I woke up aching. The next morning, I found him in the garage, shirtless, working on some shelves. Sweat glistened on his shoulders. He turned when he heard me. Hey, need a hand? I asked. He looked at me, really looked at me. And then he said, I think we need to talk. I shut the garage door behind me and locked it. He watched me as I stepped closer, the door clicking shut behind me. The heat inside the garage was thick, the kind that clung to your skin. I could hear the quiet ticking of a cooling engine and the distant chirp of birds outside, but all I could really focus on was the tension hanging between us like a taut wire. Jack set down the screwdriver he'd been holding. This is dangerous, he said, but he didn't sound like he meant it. I walked toward him slowly, hands slightly trembling, heart hammering so hard I thought it might give me away. You kissed me yesterday, I said softly. I know. I kissed you back.
His jaw flexed.
I know that too. There was a long silence. His eyes dropped to my lips. So what do we do now? I didn't answer with words. I stepped into him, feeling the heat of his bare chest against my blouse. My fingers found his shoulders, still damp from sweat, and I let them slide down his arms. When I looked up at him, there was no hesitation left. Just hunger. His hands found my hips, pulled me in, and then his mouth was on mine again. The kiss this time wasn't hesitant. It was frantic, full of everything we'd been trying to ignore for days. Weeks, if I was honest with myself. Maybe even years. I felt his hand slip under the hem of my blouse, fingers grazing my stomach. My skin jumped under his touch. "I've thought about this," he murmured against my neck. "More times than I should admit." "Me too," I whispered. I didn't stop him when he lifted my blouse over my head. I didn't stop him when he pushed the straps of my bra down my shoulders or when his mouth found my breast, warm and wet and full of wanting. My back hit the workbench, and I heard tools rattle as his hands slid under my waistband and peeled everything off, piece by piece, like he'd been imagining this moment for years. Because maybe he had. I know I had. When he finally slid inside me, it was slow at first, almost reverent. Like he knew how long I'd been waiting. I clutched at him, nails digging into his shoulders as we moved together, hard and quiet, careful only in the way that someone must be when there's a house full of memory just a few walls away. I came first with a cry I barely managed to swallow. He followed, groaning against my neck, holding me like a man afraid to let go. Afterward, we didn't speak for a while. I leaned against the workbench, breathing hard, my heart still pounding. He was next to me, shirt back on, eyes distant. "This changes everything," he said eventually. I looked at him, brushing hair from my face. "I know. You're married, Rena."
I'm aware.
"And I'm your—" "Don't say it," I cut in quickly. "It doesn't feel like that. You've never been my brother, Jack."
Not really.
We didn't grow up together. We were adults when our parents married. This, I gestured between us. "It's complicated, but it's not wrong. At least not in that way." He gave a small, wry smile. "Still feels a little twisted." I shrugged. Maybe that's what makes it so hard to stop. We agreed it had to be a one-time thing. A slip. A mistake we wouldn't repeat. But we both knew we were lying. Over the next week, the tension between us tightened to the point of snapping. We avoided each other at breakfast, but our eyes always found one another. He'd pass behind me in the kitchen and let his fingers graze my back, just enough to set me on fire. I'd find excuses to linger when we were alone. Folding laundry in the guest room he slept in. Asking for help reaching something on a high shelf. We never said it out loud, but it was there, humming under every word. Michael remained oblivious. Too buried in work, too dulled by routine to notice the electricity sparking every time Jack and I were in the same room. I hated myself a little for that, for how easy it had become to lie. To smile and kiss my husband on the cheek after I'd been in his stepbrother's arms just hours before. The second time happened in the laundry room.
It was midday.
Michael was on a video call in his office, and I was pulling warm sheets from the dryer when Jack came in behind me. "You forgot your phone," he said, setting it on the counter. "Thanks."
He didn't leave.
Just stood there, watching me. "You're torturing me," he said after a moment. I turned. "I haven't touched you." "That's not what I mean." He stepped forward, his voice lower now. "You walk around this house in those little shorts. That tank top with no bra. You smell like heaven and fold my underwear like we're playing house." I swallowed hard. "You want me to stop?" He was in front of me in 2 steps, hands on my hips.
No.
"I want you to stop pretending this isn't happening." His mouth found mine again, hotter this time, more desperate. We didn't even make it out of the laundry room. Bent over the dryer, his hands gripping my hips, my legs trembling, I let him have me again. Fast, rough, completely unplanned.
It was supposed to be the last time.
But we both knew it wouldn't be. Some nights I'd lie awake in bed next to Michael, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what I was doing. Jack was wrong for me in every obvious way, but he made me feel alive, desired, like a woman again, not just someone's aging wife. I wasn't thinking about consequences. I wasn't thinking about guilt. I was thinking about skin, heat, that pulse between my legs that had been ignored for too many years. I was thinking about the way Jack looked at me like I was 25 and dangerous. One afternoon, I found him in the guest room, packing a bag. "You're leaving?" I asked, throat tightening. "I have to," he said without turning around. "This you and me. It's getting out of hand." I crossed the room, put my hand on his back. "Jack." He turned to me, jaw clenched. "You're married, Rena. This isn't just a fling. This is a goddamn train wreck waiting to happen. Then why does it feel so good? I asked. Because it's forbidden, he said. Because it's everything you've been missing and everything I've been wanting. I kissed him again. I couldn't help it. He didn't push me away. He never did. We ended up on the bed, clothes half on, half off, his mouth hot and urgent between my legs. I bit my lip to keep from moaning too loud. When he slid into me, we moved together like we'd done this forever, like our bodies had been waiting years to meet in just this way. Later, lying against his chest, I whispered, "What are we doing?" He didn't answer right away. "Falling," he said finally, "and praying we don't hit the ground." We didn't hit the ground, not right away anyway. We hovered there for weeks, suspended in something that felt a little like heaven and a lot like hell. Jack didn't leave like he said he would. And I didn't tell him to. We went on pretending, to my husband, to ourselves, to the ticking time bomb of what we were doing. I still cooked dinner every night, still smiled and laughed and played the dutiful wife. I even climbed into bed with Michael when he reached for me one Thursday evening after too many glasses of wine. It was awkward and quiet and over in less than 5 minutes. I lay there afterward, staring at the ceiling, feeling hollow and used, worse than if nothing had happened at all. The next morning, I found Jack in the garden, shirtless and barefoot, kneeling in the soil while the sun crept over his back. I stood in the kitchen watching him through the window, an ache blooming inside me. It wasn't just the sex anymore. It hadn't been for a while. It was the way he saw me, the way I felt in his presence. I'd been sleepwalking through my life, and now I was wide awake. When I walked out to him with coffee, he stood and wiped his hands on a rag, a smudge of dirt on his cheek. "You didn't come to me last night," he said quietly. "My husband came to me instead." He looked down, nodding once. "It didn't mean anything," I added quickly. "Did it ever?" he asked. I didn't answer. I wasn't sure I could. What did it mean anymore? 27 years of marriage that felt like a faded photograph. Jack reached out and touched my wrist, fingers soft against my skin. "Come with me," he said. "Where?" "Anywhere."
For a day.
"Just you and me." I hesitated. "I can't disappear without an excuse." "Make one," he said simply. "You do it all the time now." I hated how right he was. So I told Michael I was spending the day helping a friend look at kitchen remodels. He barely looked up from his laptop. "Sounds boring," he muttered. "It is," I replied. And just like that, I was free. We drove up the coast with the windows down, the wind pulling at my hair, Jack's hand resting on my thigh. I wore a sundress I hadn't pulled out in years. He couldn't stop looking at me. "I forgot what it feels like to just breathe," I said at one point, staring out at the cliffs and the ocean beyond. He glanced at me. "I'll remind you every chance I get." We ended up in a sleepy beach town and rented a room in a small, old hotel that smelled faintly of salt and lemons. The moment the door closed behind us, he pulled me in and kissed me like he'd been starving. We barely made it to the bed. Everything about that day felt like a dream. We lay naked under thin white sheets, sunlight pouring across the bed like honey. We talked, really talked, about who we were, about regrets, about how hard it was to admit we'd both spent so many years chasing the wrong things. "I was always drawn to you," he said, tracing circles on my bare stomach. "Even when I shouldn't have been. I used to imagine you watching me when we were younger," I confessed. "Like I was crazy for even thinking it." "You weren't crazy," he whispered. I watched. The admission sent a fresh flush through me, even at my age. Especially at my age. We stayed until dark. Had dinner in the same room, ordered up by a kind old woman at the front desk who gave us knowing eyes but asked no questions. Afterward, he took me again, slow this time, reverent, like he was memorizing every inch of me. When we finally left, I felt a sadness in my chest I couldn't shake. Because I knew I didn't want this to end. But reality was waiting, as it always is. When I walked through the door just after 10, Michael was sitting at the dining table with a tumbler of scotch in front of him. He looked at me with glassy, unreadable eyes. "You smell like the ocean," he said. I froze. "We live inland." I set down my bag, carefully. We want to look at a friend's rental property near the coast. She's thinking of flipping it. He nodded slowly, took a sip. You used to be a terrible liar. I still am, I said quietly. He didn't say anything more, just stared at the ice melting in his glass. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not out of guilt, but fear. Not fear of being caught, fear of losing whatever Jack and I had stumbled into. It was madness, and I knew it, but it made me feel something again. Something real. 2 days later, Jack handed me a folded piece of paper. What's this? I asked. Addressed to a property I found. It's small. Has a garden. A porch swing. Enough space for 2 people who want something quiet. I blinked at him. You think we could just start over? I don't know, he said. But don't you want to find out? I did. God help me, I did. And that scared me more than anything. Because I still hadn't told Michael. I still hadn't shattered the illusion of the life we'd built. You're asking me to burn everything down, I whispered. No, he said gently. I'm asking you to stop pretending the house isn't already on fire. That night, I told my husband I needed to talk. He looked up at me and said nothing. I haven't been happy, I started. For a long time. I know, he said. You knew. You think I don't notice the way you look at him? The way you stopped looking at me. He exhaled, a long, weary sound. I just didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to hurt you. Well, too late for that. The silence that followed was the deepest I'd ever known. Then, finally, he asked, Do you love him? I hesitated. I don't know yet. But you want to try? I nodded, tears in my throat. Yes. And for the first time in years, I saw Michael cry. Quietly. Just a single tear down his cheek. Then go, he said, voice low. But please, don't lie to me again. I didn't sleep that night. After our conversation, Michael went to the guest room, closing the door softly behind him like someone trying not to wake the dead. And maybe, in a way, that's what we were, ghosts of who we used to be. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling for hours, replaying everything. Every word, every look. I thought about the first time I met Jack. The awkward dinner. His quiet confidence. The flicker in his eyes, even then. I'd told myself for years that it was nothing. That I imagined it. But now, after everything, I wondered if we had both spent all this time waiting for something neither of us had the nerve to admit. By sunrise, I had my answer. I packed a single overnight bag. Just enough to breathe. I left Michael a note. Not a letter, just a few lines. I'm not leaving out of anger. I'm leaving because I've been gone for a long time already. I didn't wake him. I couldn't bear it. When I got to Jack's place, the little cottage outside town, he was already on the porch, sitting in a weathered chair with coffee in his hand. He didn't smile when he saw me. Just looked at me like he already knew what I was going to say. I told him, I said. He nodded once. How did he take it? As well as you'd expect. He stood and took the bag from my hand. And you? How are you taking it? I let out a breath that felt like it came from 10 years ago. Like I just peeled off skin that didn't belong to me anymore. He reached out and brushed hair from my face. Then maybe it's time to grow into the woman you were supposed to be. The days that followed felt like walking into a different version of my life. The pace slowed. Mornings stretched into afternoons with no urgency. Jack and I spent hours in the garden, hands dirty and hearts bare. At night we cooked together, usually half-dressed, music playing softly in the background. He'd catch me dancing barefoot in the kitchen and pull me close, his hands slipping beneath the hem of my sundress, finding the skin he already knew by heart. We made love like the world was ending. Sometimes slow, reverent like prayer. Other times fast and desperate, on the kitchen counter, in the shower, once outside under the stars. I'd never known a man who worshipped a woman's body like Jack did. He memorized every inch of me, every sound I made, every way I liked to be touched. And the way he looked at me afterward, like I was the only woman who had ever mattered, that was the part that undid me the most. Still, there were hard days. Guilt doesn't just vanish because desire takes its place. I'd built a life with Michael. shared a home, holidays, a child we'd raised and sent out into the world. Even if that life had become quiet, even if I hadn't felt seen in years, it wasn't nothing. You don't spend almost 3 decades with someone and walk away without scars. One evening, I sat on the porch with a glass of wine and watched the sun fall behind the hills. Jack joined me, dropping into the chair beside mine, legs stretched out, forearm grazing mine. "Do you ever miss it?" I asked. "The life you had before?" He considered the question. "I miss certain things, but not the way I felt in that life." "What do you mean?" "I always felt like I was standing outside my own skin, going through the motions, smiling on command, dating women who wanted a version of me that didn't exist." I nodded slowly. "I know that feeling." He turned his head to look at me. "But with you, I feel like I'm finally inside my life, for better or worse." I reached out and took his hand. Same. Weeks passed, then months. I eventually signed the divorce papers Michael sent without drama.
No loaders. No threats.
Just a quiet end. A note tucked inside from him read, "We were good once. I hope you find that again. Maybe you already have." I cried when I read it. Not because I regretted leaving, but because sometimes endings are sad even when they're right. One Saturday, Jack and I hosted a small dinner for a few friends from town. I caught him watching me across the table as I laughed with a neighbor's wife. His gaze held something soft and full of fire. Later that night, as I stood in front of the mirror brushing my hair, he came up behind me, wrapped his arms around my waist, and said, "You're glowing." "It's the wine," I teased. "No," he said. "It's you." I turned to face him. "Do you ever wonder how it would have been if we'd met differently? If our parents hadn't been the weird bridge between us?" He smiled. "You think I would have been able to stay away from you if we weren't tied by some awkward family thread?" "I think we might have ended up in bed faster," I said, grinning. "Doubtful," he murmured. "We were already moving at lightning speed." I laughed, then paused. "Do you think people will judge us?" He kissed my forehead. "People will always judge. But they're not the ones lying next to you at night. They're not the ones touching you like this." His hands slid down to cup the curve of my backside, "or making you come so hard you forget your own name." I moaned softly, leaned into him. "God, I love it when you talk dirty." He chuckled. "I love it when you forget to be polite." We didn't make it to the bedroom. Right there, against the vanity, I let him pull my robe open and press his mouth to my breasts, licking a path down my belly as I leaned back and spread my legs for him. His tongue knew me by now, how I liked it slow at first, then faster, deeper, until my knees shook and I cried out, clutching his hair, shaking with the kind of release that feels like a rebirth. When he stood and kissed me, my own taste on his lips, I wrapped my arms around his neck and whispered, "Don't ever let me sleepwalk through life again." "I won't," he said, lifting me effortlessly and carrying me to bed. "I'll wake you every day." We were never supposed to be a love story. But that's the thing about life at our age. You stop worrying so much about the rules, about appearances, about what other people think. What matters most is how you feel when you wake up next to someone, how your body softens when they touch you, how your soul exhales. Jack was unexpected, inappropriate, complicated, but he was mine, and I was finally completely his.